Richard McLaughlin was asleep in his bed in Prince George's County, Maryland, when his dog woke him up. This wasn't unusual for the retired police chief, but he later stated in court that the dog seemed to be acting strangely, and it turns out this behavior was for good reason. McLaughlin's 2 vehicles in his driveway were on fire, and the fire was spreading to the detached garage and to the house where McLaughlin and his family had been sleeping. When McLaughlin later reviewed the surveillance video footage, he was shocked to find that this wasn't any sort of accidental fire. Someone had intentionally lit his cars and garage on fire while he and his family slept behind a wall just 6 feet away from the burning cars in the driveway. It's possible that the actions of their dog, Shirley the goodest boy, saved his family from a tragic fate that night. Join us now on Crime to Burn as we dive into the second part of the David Michael Crawford serial arson case. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes and bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And I'm Big Daddy Smooth.
I wanted to think of something witty to say, but I got nothing.
That's right. It just hit you, didn't it? You felt it was palpable.
Yeah, I did. Okay. I would like to sincerely thank all of our listeners because last week, Crime to Burn somehow made it to number 4 on the weekly indie documentary chart on Good Pods. We also ranked on several other charts, but number 4 is our highest rank, and I was pretty excited about it, even though I don't understand how these algorithms work. But thank you to everyone that has listened, and especially to everyone that has taken the time to leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you use to listen. A 5-star review goes so far in helping us grow our audience, so if you have not yet had the chance to leave us one of those reviews, please consider doing so this week. Also, I am most active on social media on Instagram, but you can find us on X, YouTube, and Facebook. Growing our audience through social media is a ton of work, and the best way that you can help us get our content in front of new potential listeners is to interact with content that you see from us. Especially when you share our reels or posts within the apps where you find them, that counts for so much for those algorithmic overlords deciding what content to push out. So if you see a post from us, maybe consider hitting that share button and DMing it to a couple friends you think might enjoy our podcast, or tagging them in the comments. It would help us out a lot, and we would be really appreciative. And of course, your likes and comments go a long way to help us grow.
Please, sir, can I have some more?
Yeah.
Alms! Alms for the poor!
If you have feedback for us, we're available at crimetoburn@gmail.com, and we would love the opportunity to address any concerns you have before you consider leaving us a low review. And finally, go subscribe to our YouTube channel. So many people use YouTube daily, and the more subscribers we have, and the more little thumbs ups we get, the more likely YouTube is to push our content out there to new potential audience members. So that'd be great if you would do that. Thank you.
And it makes you look sexy.
Oh, so sexy. Alright, last week I had reported that I reached out to the defense counsel, but he hadn't responded to me. But after recording, he actually did respond to me. Now, he declined to make a comment, which I totally understand. His message was very kind, and maybe someday in the future when all this is over, he'll feel inclined to reach back out to us, I hope. But even if he doesn't, he was super kind to share with us the appellate brief. And that is public record, so I could have gotten it anyway from the court, but he saved me a couple steps and a few dollars. So thank you so much, Mr. Bonsip. I really appreciate it.
I feel like I understand this guy a little bit, because I spend half my time here declining to comment.
Yeah, but you're not defending a person that's accused of setting 12 separate fires. And that's not all he's accused of, as we're going to find out.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Time will tell.
Yeah. Last week we also spent a good part of the show going through disclaimers, and I'm not going to cover them all again, but I will encourage you to please go and listen to those if you haven't. And I included all of my current source information in last week's show notes. I will refer back to those show notes with future episodes, but as I add more sources as I continue to write these episodes, I may do additional research. I will add them in the show notes also. Alright, I don't think I made it clear in last week's episode, but the fire that we discussed at Marty Flemingen's home was not in Howard County where the defendant stood trial, and so as a result, I just want to be sure everyone knows he has not been found guilty of arson in that particular case. Now, the evidence that was found was presented in court as a related crime to establish motive for the crimes that he did stand trial for in Howard County, and I think that the evidence tying him to the case is pretty strong, but I just want to make it clear that he is innocent until proven guilty, and he has not been proven guilty in that case. The same is true of the fire we're going to discuss today, which occurred in Prince George's County. This was the home of Richard McLaughlin. Now, in case you don't remember from last week, Marty Flemingen had met David Crawford when he was interviewing for the position of Deputy Police Chief of the Laurel Police Department. However, Flemingen had recommended Richard McLaughlin for the role instead of David Crawford. However, the city council and mayor had overridden his suggestion and hired Crawford. Now, when the police chief of Laurel retired, Crawford became the acting police chief, and then later the city council approved him to take over as the chief of police. However, late in 2010, he was informed by the mayor that they would be removing him from his position and installing Richard McLaughlin as his replacement. Now, my source that I spoke to indicated that when he was notified of this change, that he actually requested the opportunity to retire instead of being removed, and that courtesy was granted to him. Now, my source also indicates that the reason for this change was due to the fact that as police chief, Crawford had been slacking in his duties by not getting things to the city council that he owed them in a timely manner. Now, this source of mine that I spoke to off the record has extensive knowledge of Crawford's career in Laurel, and so I asked him about Crawford's overall attitude and disposition. After all, we're going to find out that revenge is the alleged motive for all of the fires. And so he told me, and he was very careful about how he worded everything, that the impression he had was that you did not want to cross David Crawford. One example he gave was that if one of the officers crossed him, they might find themselves put on night shift, or having to work holidays, or getting their leave requests rejected. Now, he doesn't give me any specific times when those specific things happened, but he mentioned those as the kinds of things that people dealt with him reportedly. So nothing outright egregious, but still may be considered a bit toxic by people working under him. In all fairness, I also want to mention that my source commented that he felt some irritation that people he knew were buddies with Crawford when he was in his position in Laurel, that those people then turned around and made statements to the press after his arrest that he was a bully, and he felt that some of those people accusing him in the press of that kind of behavior may have actually been party to that behavior and supported it while Crawford was police chief. So in the interest of being impartial, I wanted to mention that.
Birds of a feather.
Yeah. Now, I did find some press reports where other police officers that had worked with him made comments to the press, and I reached out to those people. None of them got back to me. However, there were officers that worked with him that told the press that he was a bully, and an officer suggested in the press that there was some other issues and incidents that are completely unrelated to these arsons that he implied wouldn't have been out of character for Crawford, and he thought that Crawford should be investigated for those crimes. What were those crimes? Well, we're going to be getting into those shortly, because not only did a cop suggest Crawford might be connected to them, Crawford's own daughter outright identified her father in a taped interview with a Maryland news channel as a potential suspect in these crimes. She told a news reporter that when police had actually zeroed in on her dad for the arson cases that they were investigating, they had shown up at her work and asked her if she thought her dad was a vengeful person or would potentially be motivated to hurt others that he had perceived as having wronged him. And she reports that she told investigators that, yeah, this is something that she imagined her father would be capable of, and she would be able to classify him as a potentially vengeful person.
Could he be a vengeful person?
According to his daughter.
Could anyone be a vengeful person?
Anyone could be.
Right. So it seems like a stupid question to me.
But if somebody came to me and said, hey, April, we're investigating your dad for the string of arsons and we think that the motive is revenge. Does that sound like your dad? I would honestly be able to say no.
I would have to ask a question.
Like what?
What happened?
Well, I don't know.
What do you mean? What happened? Is he vengeful in what circumstance? Like, what did someone kick his dog and, like, what happened?
I don't think even if you kicked my dad's dog, he would be vengeful.
I think there's some circumstance that can push just about any human into doing horrible, violent, terrible things.
I mean, the things that he was mad about, we already know for Fleming, it was that Fleming recommended somebody else for the job that he wanted. And then...
I was just trying to say that you can convince anyone that anyone is capable of doing anything.
That's true.
That's all I was saying.
Alright, well, anyway, his daughter didn't think that it was out of the question for her father to be vengeful over things that other people might consider petty.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe it was phrasing, or, you could ask that question.
That's true, I wasn't there.
Different ways, and, yeah.
I was not there.
I don't know.
But with this information, my thoughts here were, if this guy has a reputation for being a bully, to the point that someone he worked with could suggest that he possibly be involved in these alleged crimes related to his daughter, then surely there's some sort of disciplinary record or complaint file in his police files. And, I mean, he had a police career for over 30 years. So I thought, if he's really this big of a bully, it's shown up somewhere in his past. Now, Maryland passed a law several years ago that makes police disciplinary and complaint files public record. Obviously, the police unions are fighting this tooth and nail. So some jurisdictions have reportedly attempted to thwart this law by attaching extreme pricing structures to these records retrieval requests. I read about one case, I think in the Baltimore Banner, and I think the county was Montgomery County, where they told a reporter that to get one officer's record, it was going to be like thousands of dollars, or maybe even tens of thousands of dollars. So there's been a lot of court uprising cases over this law. So I requested these records with a lot of trepidation.
You can make a racket out of anything.
So in the interest of doing my due diligence, I tried. I started with the very first police department that Crawford served in, which was Baltimore City. And to my immense shock, they were actually initially the easiest to work with. They responded immediately. Everything went like clockwork. I got my response faster than anyone else. The request that I made to them, I'm just going to read you a little quote from the request document, was records of disciplinary action, public complaints, internal affairs investigations, or complaints from other law enforcement officers against David Michael Crawford while employed by Baltimore City Police. So they responded with the code that governed my request, and then they said, after a diligent search by DCU has determined that there are no disciplinary records for David Michael Crawford. So, for his career in Baltimore, nothing. So then I reached out to Prince George's County Police Department, and they did get back to me on my initial request, which was just finding out how to submit the request. And they sent me a form to fill out, which I then filled out and returned in April of this year. I followed up several times. I never once got a response once I submitted the form, so I'm kind of putting them on blast here, but I will say that I emailed the corporal in the Records Management Division again just this morning and notified him that this podcast is in production and offering him the chance to respond again, and so I will update you if he responds back.
TikTok, bitch.
And then I reached out to District Heights, which was the department that he was with right before he took the job in Laurel. I couldn't figure out how to make the records request in District Heights. It's not on any of their websites that I could find, so I sent some emails and I made some phone calls, and nobody called me back and nobody emailed me back. So District Heights, I'm giving you the side eye, and maybe if you are involved in the City of District Heights management, you could get in touch with me at crimetoburn@gmail.com about those requests. Thanks.
And if not, you could at least go to crimetoburn.com and watch this podcast.
Yeah, at least know that I'm giving you side eye.
I mean, listen to this podcast. You can't really watch it right now.
Well, you can watch it on YouTube. It's just a little...
You're going to watch a little soundbar.
Yeah. Alright, and then I reached out to the City of Laurel, and at first I had issues getting a call or email back from them too, but it turns out it was because I was reaching out to the wrong organization within the City of Laurel. However, one of my contacts that had worked with David Crawford jumped in to assist, And they helped me get in touch with the right people. And once I got in touch with the right people, they jumped to it. They got me the forms. They explained how to submit them. They asked to be CC'd when I submitted them so they could track them through the system. So they were really helpful. So thank you, City of Laurel. And I got a response from the city solicitor for the City of Laurel, which is a law firm that's located in Greenbelt, Maryland. Now, their response said the following. This is a direct quote. The custodian has completed processing your request relative to the above referenced MPIA request. There were no records found. End quote. And then there's the spiel at the end where it talks about I can, if I feel that they've made an error or something, that I have a right to judicial intervention, blah, blah, blah. But it said...
Somebody's trying to sandbag bureaucracy books.
So my question... Both of those said there's no records found. But my question is, does that mean that there was literally no records found? Or that any records that were found didn't meet the requirements of the law for being public record? So I looked up what the exceptions were.
You know what? If there's someone smart out there that's a lawyer, you were thinking about doing some free stuff, you could use some free stuff over
we
here.
Could use some free stuff. Like I said, so here's what I was thinking. I was thinking a 30-year career, allegations of being a bully, some really big allegations from his family, a 10-year arson spree allegedly motivated by vengeance over petty infractions against him, and not one police complaint record over a 30-plus year career. So I had some questions. So I looked up the specific law to see if there was any exemptions, and there are, but both police departments, when they responded, they said that there were no records. They didn't say that they had records, but they couldn't be released under exemption, blah, 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 blah. But just to be thorough, here are the exemptions. Exemption 1 is if another law prevents disclosure. And I'm not a lawyer, so bear with me. If you're a lawyer, feel free to reach out, crimetoburn@gmail.com.
This is probably going to be painful for you, actually.
But I know when it comes to trial witnesses, for example, they're prohibited by law from discussing the case outside of the courtroom. So it's possible that there may be a law that says court records that are part of an evidence file or that have been subpoenaed may be prohibited from being released. And I'm just not aware of that law because I'm not going to read the entire Maryland code. However, if this was the case, like I said, I would have expected a response that said that the records were prohibited from being released based on blah, 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 blah. That was what I would expect. Anything that includes social security numbers, home addresses, phone numbers of government employees can be held back. However, the law states that where possible, they should just redact that information and release the records. And then this one's a little more sticky. It says, custodians can exercise discretion as to whether to disclose specified records. And the example given on the website I was looking at was that they might withhold investigatory records, inter or intra-agency memoranda and letters. And this just seemed really broad to me. But again, from the 2 police departments that responded to me, they said they had no records that met the criteria I submitted.
It does sound a little to me like it's discretionary on some level.
It does. So based on the responses I got, it appears there's no complaints or disciplinary actions against him. However, I know from court testimony that there was at least one employee complaint against Crawford to a superior officer while he was employed at District Heights. And we're going to be getting into this in detail later. But what I know is that the superior officer overrode a decision that Crawford had made. But that doesn't mean that there was any official complaint with a paper trail made. So, and since District Heights was one of the departments that didn't respond to me, I don't know if there is any official record of it. So to sum up, we have reports in the press from colleagues that he was a bully. We have a discussion with a source that worked with him that said he was known to retaliate and assign less favorable job roles to people that crossed him. I know of one specific incident in District Heights that we're going to talk about more where a superior officer overruled him. And we have allegations by his daughter. Now, why is this relevant? Well, in the Marty Fleming fire, the only potential motive was based on some bad feelings about Fleming and not wanting to hire him and wanting McLaughlin in that role instead. And then later, McLaughlin was given the chief position when Crawford was essentially forced to retire. And so that brings us to the morning of March 16th, 2019 on Maple Terrace in Laurel, Maryland.
You've paved a really good yellow brick road right up to that
I have?
sidewalk. I think so.
Good. So this fire occurred 8 years after the fire at Marty Fleming's house. I just want to make sure you're aware of that timing. That's 8 years.
That's enough time to do anything.
Well, we're going to talk about some things he did in that 8 years, but Richard McLaughlin was asleep in his home when his dog woke him up at 3:30 a.m., which was not unusual, but he testified that the dog was acting weird. He testified that when he got to the sliding glass doors at his dining room to let the dog out in the backyard to go to the bathroom, he noticed that the house was smoky and he could smell something burning. Now, he had what he called in court a heating plant in his basement that had a chimney that ran next to the sliding glass door, I think on the exterior of the house. So he went down to the basement to check it out. And as he got into the basement, he had a view of a basement window that was facing his driveway, and he could see an orange glow through that window. And he thought at first that his neighbor's house was on fire, and so he ran outside intending to go and wake them up. But when he came around the side of his house, he realized it was actually his cars, his detached garage, and the exterior wall of his bedroom, where he had just been sleeping, that was on fire. So he hurries inside, wakes his wife and kids to get them out of the house, calls 911, and then he goes to get his water hose to try to prevent the fire from spreading further, but the exterior hose valve was turned off because it was March and it had been turned off over the winter to prevent it from freezing. So he had to go back inside, turn on the water valve, and then come back out and start spraying down his house to try to prevent the fire from spreading. Now, during this period where he's waking the family, calling 911, getting the water hose turned on, the fire actually caused the window into the basement that's adjacent to the driveway to break, and fire actually impinged into the house at that level. So we once again get to listen to video, but Mr. McLaughlin actually did a little bit of narration during this video, so it was a little easier to figure out what was going on. We can hear upset voices on the video, probably those of his wife and daughter, and we can hear car tires exploding as the fire progresses. And at one point, we actually do hear the gas tank of one of the cars exploding. And then the fire department arrives and they put out the fire.
That usually only happens in the movies.
Well, it happened here. The gas tank exploded.
The special effects for this are in your mind.
Yeah, it probably did not look like the movies. But in McLaughlin's home security footage from before the fire, there is someone going up to the house, pouring gasoline from containers onto the cars and the front of the garage door, and then leaving a trailer of gasoline down the driveway where they were able to light the trailer. Now, this may be because our defendant, who we know is accused in this crime, may have learned a valuable lesson after setting his own pants on fire at the Fleming house, so now he's using a trailer to start the fire instead of standing next to where he dumped all of the flammable liquids out.
He didn't want to be caught stomping on his own shoe again. That's terribly embarrassing.
Or abandoning his pants in the storm drain. So the defense here in court asks two very targeted questions and specifies to the witness to only answer a yes or no without further explanation. Now, a lot of times, this would be considered leading the witness based on my vast experience of super accurate television shows and movies. Note sarcasm. So this would be typically leading the witness, which would be a bad thing. However, based on multiple bench conferences that occurred during this trial, when there is a possibility that the witness would reveal prejudicial information that the defense objects to being admitted, sometimes in bench conference, the defense will agree to allow the prosecution to ask the question in such a leading way to limit the information that's admissible without introducing a prejudicial statement.
This is the kind of tricky rules and things that make games no fun.
Yeah, well, I thought it was really interesting because if the witness might have answered this question in a specific way and expounded on it, what they expounded on likely would have been hearsay in this case. So the prosecution was able to tell them only to answer yes or no to these two questions. I'm going to tell you what the two questions were. Question 1. Is the gait of the individual that you see in the video similar to the gait of the defendant? Gait meaning the way he walks.
Okay. G-A-I-T.
Yes. And McLaughlin answered yes. And question 2 was, is that observation because you walked behind him for many years? And the answer was yes. So in the video of this fire, they clearly have video of the perpetrator walking. And it's been reported in the press that Crawford had a very distinctive walk.
I'm sure that's very compelling. I'm sure it really is. Like, if you know somebody, you kind of know how they walk and stuff like that. But in my opinion, that's crap. Like, anyone can walk like anyone if they really try.
And you're absolutely right. And so I am going to get into the evidentiary stuff, which is what's really compelling. But I'm trying to sort of break up like the technical court stuff and the technical evidentiary stuff with sort of the narrative to keep it engaging and not lose people that are bored by science and stuff.
Yeah.
So we'll be getting into that. But I will tell you that I will tell you the evidence is very compelling. We'll get to it, not in this episode, but we'll be getting to it.
All right.
Now, it is reported that David Crawford walked with a sort of distinctive gait due to some sort of injury that he sustained at some point. Now, I don't know any specifics, however, I did find it interesting that when he showed up to court, initially, he showed up in a wheelchair. Now, the press asked the question as to whether or not this might have been an attempt to disguise his gait from the jury, or was it an attempt to cause the jury to view him as too frail to commit the acts in question. Whatever the reason, the prosecution objected to him using the wheelchair, and they actually cited video from the jail where he was held before trial, showing him ambulating throughout the jail without using a cane or a wheelchair as grounds for their objection.
I've heard of people using the wheelchair thing to, get some sympathy or whatever.
And that may have been what they were doing. However, the defense...
I've never heard of someone calling them on it, though.
Well, the defense indicated that he had not suggested that David use a wheelchair, and he suggested that it might have been the sheriff's office idea because he did move somewhat slowly, and maybe moving the defendant was just easier, and he did not object to the court telling the defense that the defendant would be coming, without a doctor's order, the defendant would be coming to jail on his own power. And so after that, he came in walking, and not in a wheelchair.
That's got to be kind of a gotcha, right?
Yeah. Well, and the press, latched onto it. Back to McLaughlin's testimony. The prosecution started to question the witness about an incident in which he'd seen Crawford about 2 years after Crawford had retired. Now, when the prosecution brought up this event, the defense quickly objected, and there was a bench conference. Now, again, the jury does not get to hear bench conferences. But the deal was that the defense knew that the witness was going to testify that the defendant apparently gave him a major case of stink eye at this event, saying that he stared him down but never came over to speak to him. But the defense objected that the fact that the look was a glare was just the witness's interpretation of the defendant's state of mind, and he can't testify to the defendant's state of mind. Now, the prosecution said this was an observation and not a conclusion, but the defense pointed out that, it's a glare to one person could be a squint to another.
That's fair enough, man. I've been accused of looking grumpy when I'm really not.
Yeah. Maybe Crawford just has a severe case of resting bitch face.
Oh, that's tempting. I'm not gonna.
So the prosecution just backed down from this line of questioning and moved on. Honestly, the evidence against Crawford, I think, is strong enough without that part of the testimony. However, McLaughlin did testify to an event that occurred while he was deputy chief and Dave was the chief. Between somewhere around 2009 and 2010, McLaughlin was informed that there was a complaint about one of the sworn officers serving in the Laurel Police Department. And this sworn officer was accused of filming someone's daughter with a hidden camera in the daughter's closet.
That's heavy.
Now, McLaughlin inquired about where exactly the crime had occurred because he needed to decide how to proceed, and it had been in the Howard County part of Laurel, which was outside the jurisdiction of the Laurel City Police. So McLaughlin notified Howard County and turned the investigation over to them. And then he contacted his chief, David Crawford, to inform him of what had occurred. Now, according to McLaughlin, Crawford's response was out of control profanity and yelling.
I can see that. That's not a surprise. I'm not surprised.
Not at the crime that had occurred, at McLaughlin's turning it over to Howard County.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Yeah. Now, McLaughlin also testified that when he initially began working with McLaughlin, His opinion of him had initially been very high, and he viewed him as a mentor. And he testified that over the course of his tenure with Crawford, that there had been more and more closed-door heated arguments. And he specifically said of those closed-door disagreements that by the time the door opened, it was however Dave wanted it.
Dave's a grab him by the kind of guy.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to bleep that, but yeah. He also testified that the defendant started coming to work less and less, but didn't expound on that. But that seems to align with my source that told me that he was getting lax in his police chief duties. So thus far in this episode, we're focusing on Mr. Crawford's alleged nature as a bully. And this is a theme that we're going to see repeated over and over again. I want to fill you in on some allegations his daughter made about him, but she actually isn't the only family member to allege that he might be willing to attack his own family if he was mad at them. In fact, she's only 1/5 of the family members alleging Crawford has a bad attitude and would be willing to attack his own family. And she didn't even testify against him in court, but you know who did? His stepbrother, his nephew, his stepson, and his daughter-in-law. And of those 4 people that testified at his trial, all of them were allegedly targets of his ire. 3 of them suffered fires, and 2 of them suffered 3 separate fires at the hands of Crawford, allegedly.
Sounds like a coincidence.
So let's start with Scott Crawford. He is the defendant's nephew, and he lived in Anne Arundel County at the time of the incident we're going to be talking about. Now, he did suffer a fire allegedly at his uncle's hands, but again, innocent until proven guilty. But the press portrayed this as though the motive was because Scott had unfriended David Crawford on Facebook, which, while I admit is amusing, there's actually a little more to it than that. Note that he has, not to my knowledge, been convicted of this fire at all, so all this is alleged.
Unfriending people on Facebook will get you shanked.
Apparently. Now, Scott Crawford testified in court to being Dave's nephew, so I believe Scott's dad is David's brother. Now, Scott's parents are divorced, and Scott testified in court that a family fight began because Dave and his wife, Mary, would spend time and hang out with Scott's mother and stepfather, which would be Dave's brother's ex-wife and her new husband. So, just to tie this relationship together, because I know that's complicated, David Crawford is hanging out with his brother's ex-wife and her husband.
Yeah, well, I still don't get my mind around it.
So Dave and Mary were reportedly hanging out with Dave's brother's ex-wife and her new husband. This reportedly pissed off Scott's dad, who is Dave's brother. So Scott asks his mother to please stop hanging out with Dave and Mary because it's making Dad mad, and she apparently declined his recommendation. And so Scott threatened her by saying that if she continued to hang out with Dave and Mary, then she would no longer be allowed to see her grandchildren, Scott's children, and Scott's wife. Now, around 2017, he apparently had a very similar conversation with Dave, and as a result of that conversation, the relationship between Dave and Scott reportedly ended, and they hadn't talked since then, and Scott took the ultimate relationship-ending step of deleting Dave and Mary as friends on Facebook.
That's really heavy.
Yeah. Now, 2 years later, in 2019, Scott's daughter is about to graduate from high school, and the family has planned a pool party. So this is just months after the fire at Richard McLaughlin's house. That's the second fire we've talked about. So Scott sends out invitations to his daughter's party via Facebook. So obviously, Dave and Mary are not invited. Not only are they not on speaking terms, but they're not Facebook friends anymore.
They're not friends on Facebook.
So
they don't know.
In court, the prosecution tried to get the witness to testify that they had knowledge that the defendant had heard about the party through other people, but that's hearsay. And so the defense objected, and it was sustained. So while the jury didn't get to hear that, it sounds like if it had been admissible, the witness would have testified that he had heard from other family that the Crawfords had reached out to them asking specifically about the pool party.
Are you telling me that you can't just get information about your family exclusively through Facebook?
I'm telling you that you can't testify to something somebody else heard. That's hearsay. But
I know what hearsay is.
Okay. He also testified that Dave and Mary were the only family members that were not invited to the party. Now, the night before the party, so July 27th, at 3:30 a.m., which is starting to sound like a very familiar time.
Isn't that but the 3:33, I guess that's a witching hour.
But yes.
Witching hour. Totally witching hour.
And he's got resting bitch face, possibly so.
Now we're into resting witch face.
Okay. So the night before the party, July 27th at 3:30 a.m., the witness was up watching TV because he worked night shift, so he had apparently just come home. And he notices an orange glow coming through the windows of his house. He runs outside to find that his above-ground pool, his privacy fence, and the entire wooden pool deck around the pool are on fire. And it just so happens that the party that day was supposed to be a pool party. The fire department comes, puts out the fire. The witness calls up his uncle, who is David's stepbrother, who also does not talk to David anymore, and asks to have the pool party at his house. And he agrees, and everyone moves on, confused as to how a pool and pool deck magically catch fire, until a search warrant reveals some evidence that links Crawford to this case. What did the search warrant reveal? Well, you're going to have to tune back in next week as we dig into even more fires, because there's 12 total fires. And the allegations of Crawford's daughter we'll be getting into, and the evidence that police uncovered when they executed that search warrant. We're going to get into all that coming up in future episodes on Crime to Burn. And she's only 1/5 of the family members accusing him of things.
Well, I'm 4/5 interested to hear the rest of it.
You better be 5/5 interested.
I changed it in my mind to mucus because I didn't want to say discharge. What was I even bitching about?
I don't remember.
What were you bitching about? See, I was doing it to you, and then it got flipped just now, and now I can't remember how I was torturing you. Now I'm just being tortured. It's like a Uno reverse card.
Can we talk about what happened to Chad?
Yeah.
No, how I gave him to you for Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Because I wanted to watch you pull body parts out of
Your
a
poor
box in front of my parents.
I did fondle his groin a lot.
I came down here today to record and found Chad, our hype guy, has undergone a horrific injury.
Yeah, it's pretty resilient, though. I don't know how catastrophic it really is. I think he's going to make a comeback.
He's missing his head.
Yeah, his head came off.
And our best theory is that a cat attempted to climb him and pulled him over, and his head fell off in the process.
I don't have a better explanation than that.
His head's behind the bar right now.
Well, it's in a box. Well, look, his little neck stump. It looks excited.
Are you saying he's got a big neck or a small bicep? I mean, your bicep's way bigger. We've gone off the rails completely.
If you had like an upside down thumb.
Those are both phalanges. Fun fact, in the last episode of Friends, when Phoebe's trying to get Rachel not to get on the plane, she tells Rachel that the plane has no phalanges.
Phoebe did what? So you always want to pack your phalanges in your
always
check luggage.
Take some extra phalanges.
Oh, take extra phalanges.
Probably. And now we know that Target sells them from our Fargo case.
Well, I'm not going to break it up, man. Say another F word.
Farfignugan.
We did not do a PSA today.
Oh, we didn't.
That's not going to be complete.
Well, we told people to bring their faux phalanges on their flights.
And this episode is brought to you by Faux Phalanges. Bring your faux phalanges on all your flights, folks. For real.
Reportedly, you can buy them at Target. Not a sponsor. Call us Target.
Here's to you, faux phalange makers. Without you, we'd have to cut off our real fingers. Without you, our real fingers would be in our noses.
Oh, gross.
Without you, we wouldn't be able to scratch our rear ends and shake hands.
This is going downhill.
You know what they say.
God, I'm scared.
2 in the pink.
Nope. You ain't right. Who hurt you?
A lot of fingers. So many fingers. That was before the Mormons got into Dr. Pepper. So you're a fire expert, right?
That's the rumor.
Could you light your farts aflame from underwater?
You can.
Have you seen this?
Yes.
Lately?
They weren't actually lighting the fire underwater. They were standing, he was standing where the bubbles were coming up, and like you can see the big flame
That's
flash.
how most people would do it.
Yeah.
I'll see it like a flare in the night.
Like a lit fart in the night.
Like a lit fart flare in the night.
Please don't make that sound again.
I have reinstalled the bottom.
Zulu checking in for sound check. Thank you, Zulu. We've got you.
I have no idea what I'm doing. What was I supposed to be?
You were going to be Big Daddy Smooth.
And I'm Big Daddy Smooth.
Okay, say it with a bigger break so it's easier to edit.
No
numbers.
No number 2 on our website. Nope, she's going to climb you. I must disengage for a moment. Feel free to ramble. What do you call that? We're investing, like it gets bigger. It's like we're investing, it gets smaller. What do you call that?
A bad investment.
You, sir, have made a bad investment, but I'll still buy you a beer anyway. You're going to be in contact with my labor union representative. You're going to suffer nonetheless. Sometimes you're your own stepbrother. If you have a wretched resting bitch face.
And the entire wooden pool deck that
have been landed on by aliens.
They are on fire.
Ooh, different. No, kill me. You think you got enough?
I think it's time to turn it off. I think it's time to make it end. Good God, make it end. All right, signing off.